This is a must-see Mondays. My name is Peter Byck. I'm a professor of practice here at the school, and I am thrilled to be introducing Sarah Holt. And I usually go without notes, but she's just got too many credits, so I got to read them. It's just the way it goes. So Sarah Holt is a producer, director, and writer and editor whose work for PBS and cable networks has allowed her to follow explorers into unknown caves, doctors into the midst of third world epidemics, and scientists unraveling the secrets of our genetic code. Her new film on addiction, called Addiction, premiered last Wednesday on Nova, so I think it's probably still being cycled through, so set your DVRs. I watched it last night. It's a very important and well-made and shocking film. Now we're going to go down the road of her career. In 2016, PBS aired her film, Can Alzheimer's Be Stopped? And in 2014, Holt produced and directed Mass Extinction, Life at the Brink. And now we're going to transition to why we're here and who's sponsoring us tonight, the AAAS Kavli Science Journalism Award, of which Sarah has won 3. That means she's not eligible anymore. Once you get the hat trick, you're done. It was established in 1945. It went global in 2015. And the AAAS award recognizes outstanding reporting for a general audience on the sciences, mathematics, and engineering. And so she's won this award with Cracking Your Genetic Code, How Memory Works, and 18 Ways to Make a Baby. She has produced and edited and wrote an episode called Rise of the Superbugs for a series called RX for Survival that won the 2005 Emmy for Outstanding Informational Programming. In 2003, she won the Emmy for Best Historical Documentary for producing, writing, and editing Shackleton's Voyage of Endurance. You can see that she doesn't just do one thing on any one show. She's the boss. And she directed and produced a 4-hour series special for PBS, The American Experience on MacArthur. That won the Primetime Emmy for Best Show, Best Series in 1999. And I actually could go on, but now we're going to hear from the filmmaker herself. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah Holt.
Professor of practice. Such an interesting... okay, well, thank you for having me. It was a really nice introduction. I really appreciate the School of Journalism and the AAAS and the Kavli Foundation for inviting me. And I have to say, the highlight of my day was learning about this journalism program. It is incredibly impressive. It far outstrips the NYU program I went to. I'm serious, decades ago. You all are doing incredible things, and the energy here is amazing, and we really need you more than ever. We need you to pursue these careers and become reporters and journalists. So thank you. So I'm here to share with you, I think this is one of the films I've cared more about than almost any film I've ever done, mainly because I realized what the opioid epidemic is doing to communities across this country. Right after I finished the Alzheimer's film, they said to me, which should be the next big medical film we do? And I said, you know, Alzheimer's kills or afflicts 5 million Americans, mainly at the end of their life. Addiction afflicts nearly 20 million Americans, and 90% of addiction starts before age 21. So it's a hugely important topic. And I got pushback. They kept saying, there are too many films on this issue. Why make another addiction film? And, you know, I went out and started looking at, you know, I'd seen a lot of the documentaries. There's Heroin on Cape Cod, the HBO film. I don't know how many of you saw it. How many people here saw that film? Well, I'm surprised because it is an incredibly devastating and chilling film because they follow all these young kids on Cape Cod, and by the end of the hour, every single one is dead. It's followed by another film they did called Warning This Drug Can Kill You. It really is inadvertently an advertisement for the failure of traditional rehab in this country. Everyone's relapsing, overdosing, dying. I think one person survives. There was the Netflix documentary Heroin. I don't know if you saw it. It won an Emmy. And it did a chilling look at overdose deaths in Huntington. So they were all incredibly powerful films. They really were scary. They made you realize how serious this was. But they were also negative. There was just absolutely no hope. Everyone died. And I really felt like we needed to do a film, and I said to Nova, we have to do a film on the science of addiction. How does the brain change when it's exposed repeatedly to drugs of abuse? The experts are saying this is a medical disorder, a brain disorder, not a moral failure. What can science tell us about what treatments work? Because it was so clear to me, looking at the films that I'd seen before, treatment is not working in this country, especially for opioid addiction. So I convinced them to let me make this film as part of a series that CPB was doing on the intersection of community and science. How can science shed light on pressing community issues? The one thing I want to say, those were the questions that I wanted to explore. And the biggest challenge for me is I just had 52 minutes. That's the PBS hour. I'm going to first just show you just a clip of the prologue, just to give you an overview of the show. We run this at the head of our program because we have to break for 2 minutes of funder credits, and a lot of people are going to just quickly look at this clip and decide, do I want to watch this show or not? So we try to give them a sense of what the show is going to be about. So I'm going to show you the prologue, and I'll be back.
A devastating epidemic.
We just didn't know what to do. We just felt powerless. A parent's worst nightmare, to find my kid not breathing.
He was always very good at telling us, Mom and Dad, everything's going to be fine. But it wasn't.
Addiction is ruining lives and ending them too soon.
Overdose is the #1 cause of death for people under 50.
We are racing against time. We have the equivalent of a Boeing 737 crashing every single day.
But what causes addiction?
Individuals struggling with addiction are actually battling millions of years of evolution because our brains are exquisitely evolved to seek rewards.
It's those cravings, the inability to stop.
A dangerous cocktail of biology and medicine, made deadlier by a drug 100 times more potent than morphine.
Fentanyl is super toxic. So you get a batch that comes on the street that's a little bit hot, and on those days, it's like bam, somebody's going down, bam, somebody's going down, bam.
But can new treatments offer hope?
We have extremely effective medications that are life-saving. This is a very treatable illness.
The solution to this is for us to embrace addiction as a disease, to bring it within the house of medicine.
People recover from addiction. Nobody is unreclaimable. The only thing that you can't recover from is death.
Addiction on Nova.
So I'm just going to be showing you little glimpses of the film, and I'm going to be trying to talk to you a little bit about some of the choices that I made. The hardest thing when I'm starting off making a film is, where am I going to shoot? How am I going to find stories? And, this was a national epidemic. My executive producer said, go to New Hampshire. You won't have to travel so much, because New Hampshire's been hard hit. I really could have made the film in Boston. Boston, I think when I talked to the EMS crews, they responded to 3,000 overdoses already that year. But I really felt like, because it was a national epidemic, I didn't want to just be in one location. And the place I was most interested in going to was West Virginia. It had the highest rate of overdose deaths in the nation. I'm like, why? What's going on in West Virginia? And so my first trip was flying down here, and I had really bad luck. And I want to say to you that every stroke of bad luck I had on this film turned out to be just an opportunity that I hadn't thought of. I was never able to fly into West Virginia during the course of this filmmaking. I'm sorry, I should be in front of the mic. But mainly because the Charleston airport shuts down at any, the slightest bit of rain, snow, or fog. Charleston is shut down. So I'd fly to Cincinnati and drive in, I'd fly to Richmond and drive in, I'd fly from Charlotte to drive in. But my first flight trying to get to West Virginia was canceled. I was going to have to get out and drive. And what was so great about that was I ended up driving through McDowell County, which opens what I decided is really going to be the open of the film. And I was amazed by what I saw. It was clear to me there were these once vibrant communities, and they were decimated, unemployment, poverty, despair. It was just written everywhere. So I'm just going to show you the ride that I took the first time before I came back to film, and I thought, this is a really amazing way to open the film, because to me, this sets the stage for, the conditions under which addiction can begin to creep in.
McDowell County, West Virginia, feels like a place left behind. Yet its miners helped power America when coal was king. Back then, the largest city, Welch, was a thriving community. But as coal jobs vanished by the 1990s, the poverty rate in the county climbed to 38%. Then investigators found that over a 6-year period, drug companies had flooded the state with 780 million highly addictive pain pills.
West Virginia was the perfect storm. The whole state's dominated by one of the hardest and most dangerous jobs in the world. Most of the old-timers that work in the mines work with pain, and then pain pills started flooding the community, and people that you used to know weren't the same people that they used to be. I mean, it ruined everything.
That was Jason Edwards, a coal miner, and I was really grateful he agreed to be in the film. I didn't think it would be easy to find anyone willing to go on national television and say, I'm actively using drugs. What I didn't expect was to find people who had years of recovery, behind them, who were still so afraid to, go on television. I had 3 film shoots where people who had agreed to be in the film, they just didn't show up. And they'd call me and they'd say, I thought about it. What would my boss say? Maybe they didn't realize I had a history of addiction. Maybe my neighbors never knew I struggled with addiction. One young man said to me, what if my future wife saw this film and met me at a party and wrote me off because she knew I had a history of addiction? And I couldn't tell them that being in this film wouldn't hurt them, because the stigma is incredible around addiction. Even the language that I had to use in writing the film, if you think about it, we use the word addict. We talk about people being clean or dirty. If someone has high blood sugar, we don't call them dirty. If someone has a drug test that tests positive, we call them dirty. I mean, the language is so stigmatizing around addiction. So I had a really hard time finding people to be in the film. I reached out to recovery groups. I went to churches. I went to AA meetings. I started talking to doctors, but mainly I had to convince people that I was trying to make a different film. It wasn't a sensational film. I really wanted to make a film that could educate people about addiction, put a human face on it, try to erase the stigma. And Jason and his family agreed to be in the story. All 3 of his brothers, well, he has the 3 brothers, they all 3 suffered with opioid addiction, and the mother did too. She had an operation, became addicted to opioids. Jason, he first, got opioids after a mining accident. So he had 21 surgeries, they couldn't save his leg, and they had to cut it off. And what amazed me about Jason is that he went back to work, because the mine was going to lay him off if he didn't go back to work, and he couldn't live on disability. So literally the first day he went back to work, his leg was so swollen, he couldn't wear his prosthetic leg. So he's crawling in the mines. And how is he getting through the day? He's taking OxyContin. So when I'm trying to look for characters, if there's something about them that resonates with me and moves me, I'm going to hope you're going to care about him. So I'm going to show you just this clip now when Jason has begun to realize he's crossed this line into addiction.
First time I realized that I was in trouble is when I couldn't go to work because I didn't have any pain pills. And it wasn't because of how bad I was hurting, it was because of the sickness due to detoxing.
Jason was addicted to a powerful opioid painkiller called OxyContin. Opioids like OxyContin are chemically similar to morphine, found in the opium of the poppy plant. They mimic the body's natural pain relievers like endorphins, which bind to proteins called receptors, calming pain and inducing euphoria. Prolonged opioid use can alter the brain and lead to addiction, manifested by cravings and compulsive drug use despite negative consequences.
To give you also a sense of some of the science that we were doing in the film, and I was trying to weave the science in and out of the human stories so you could get a sense of what was going on scientifically in terms of what the person was grappling with. What I was going to tell you about Jason, he went through $21,000 in one weekend on pain pills. I mean, his addiction really got out of control. He ended up, his wife left him. He tried to commit suicide. His older brother died of a drug overdose. So I think the next clip we're gonna see his younger brother, Mark, who became addicted just as a teenager because opioids were everywhere. You know, when I said at the very beginning of the film that they shipped in 780 million pain pills. That's 400 pills per man, woman, and child in West Virginia each year. There are only 2 million residents. So pain pills were everywhere. It was really amazing to me. The next clip I'm going to show you is about a young woman named Casey, because I had to make this a national story. So I went all the way across the country to California. And it's a really short clip, but I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that a lot of people, when they're telling me their story, I wasn't there to film it. They don't have the archive, they don't have photographs, they don't have, you know, home movies. And I had to do a lot of recreations to tell this story. So what impressed me about Casey was she intersected the medical system exactly at the time when we were aggressively treating pain. 14-year-old girl comes in, she's in incredible pain, she has muscle spasms, they do all these tests, they see benign mass, they think that maybe they're pushing on nerves, they operate on her, she ends up in the hospital for 6 weeks on intravenous opioids, and then they send her home. And she's in incredible pain, but not near the surgery sites. No one realized it. She was in acute opioid withdrawal. So I'm just going to show you this clip, but when you look at it and you see the scenes of her dad driving to the hospital, I asked him to go out driving one night, and I filmed that. And you know, you struggle with, as a filmmaker, well, it's not really documentary, it's recreation, and yet I tried to do things abstractly enough so I could tell the story and make it, you know, somewhat dramatic. But you never know, are you crossing a line? Should you do that? Should you not? And I've had to do it a lot in this film just because I couldn't either get into hospitals or I didn't have any way to tell someone's story. You know, I just was stepping in too late. So, here's the next.
So they whisk her back to the emergency room. What could this possibly be? She's got terrible pain. And essentially, every single time the solution was prescribe more opioids.
But after a while, they didn't help as much anymore. So I started taking way too many.
Until at one point, an emergency room doctor realized she's addicted. And what was his reaction? He basically went out and he shamed them. And he's like, your daughter's addicted. We never want to see her here again.
That was the shortest clip I'm showing. I thought Anna Lemke, who was in that clip you also saw in the prologue, she was a doctor. I thought she was an amazing interview. So I'm really always scanning hard because there's so many people you can include, but I wanted to find people that I thought were going to be really good on-camera talent. What happened to Casey? I mean, at this point later in the film, I start to really get into the science. Why did she become addicted? How did she cross that line? And, you know, there were certain things that put her at risk. She was young. Her brain was still developing. Her prefrontal cortex couldn't say, no, don't do that. You know, don't choose that. She kind of became what Anna Lembke called an opioid refugee. So she's gone into the hospital, she's become addicted, and then they completely cut her off. We don't want to see you here again. And she is in total withdrawal. She's, you know, experiencing cravings. She gets hold of pain medications and overdoses. I mean, her parents are left dealing with a young 14-year-old who's now, you know, addicted to opioids. And, you know, yes, she may have had an underlying genetic vulnerability because she had a family history of addiction. Her uncles had struggled with addiction. But really what made her addicted were the opioids that she got from her doctor. If she had not gotten those pain pills, she may never have gone down that path. One of the things that happens with drugs like opioids, but all drugs, is they dramatically increase the rise of a brain chemical called dopamine, a neurotransmitter. So when you eat, when you make love, when you do anything rewarding, you're releasing dopamine. And the problem with drugs, addictive drugs, is they raise dopamine levels up to between 2 to 10 times higher. And so your brain is flooded with dopamine, and these are some of the most powerful experiences your brain can have. And that also means that the memories of drug use are incredibly powerful, and they last a long time. Just like learning to ride a bike or having a child, the birth of a child, there's some things you never forget. You don't forget addictive behavior. And those memories are some of the things that trigger cravings that cause people to relapse much later in life. But what is the most interesting thing for me, what I think fuels addiction, is withdrawal. So I'm going to show you a clip about withdrawal, and then I'm going to talk to you about it, because most people don't think about withdrawal.
But it's not just about seeking pleasure. People struggling with addiction soon use drugs to avoid the pain of withdrawal.
Withdrawals will make your bones ache. I couldn't leave the house because I couldn't take a step without soiling myself from the withdrawals. You couldn't talk to me. I'd throw something at you or bite your head off.
When opioids are abruptly stopped, stress hormones are released at catastrophic levels. This imbalance triggers the opposite symptoms of opioid use, including shaking, anxiety, pain, and intense dysphoria.
Many times I would lay my head on a pillow and think, I'm done. I can't live like this. I don't want to be this person. And I would wake up the very next day and I would just do more drugs. I was powerless over my addiction. It consumed me, it owned me. I was a slave to it.
So when I was starting this film, one of my bosses said to me, I don't understand. I smoked cigarettes. You know, cigarettes are really hard to quit. It was hard. I was able to do it. And I said to her, yeah, but you didn't go through acute opioid withdrawal. And it doesn't kill you, but people that I would talk to in the film, or, you know, that I was, you know, interviewing about the film, said to me, you feel like you're dying. One woman said, I'd rather go through labor than go through withdrawal. And I think, to me, it was just really important to try to bring that home, because I think people are in active addiction, they're just using to get high. And really, what starts to happen is you're using not to be sick and to feel normal. And one of the things that happens is when drugs flood your brain with too much dopamine, your brain cuts back its natural supply of dopamine. So when you come down from using that drugs, instead of being at normal, you're way below normal. And dopamine is critical for everything we do. And if you don't have it, it flips your brain into survival mode, and you have to get it. I mean, so that's why you might find, you know, people do things that are crazy. They may, you know, steal, they may lie. They become obsessed with getting the drug because, you know, it's really this unbelievable craving for dopamine. So now I'm just going to show you another character, Jonathan Winnefeld, who in the end I think was overwhelmed by cravings. The reason I liked including Jonathan Winnefeld is he's from a very, respectable, highly, prominent family. His dad was on the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 2011. He directed the bombing of Afghanistan. Very, very loving family. You look at the home movies of Jonathan, and it looks like he had an amazing childhood. I mean, a lot of love. But there was one problem that I think was hard for him. As a military family, they were moving constantly, and that was hard for him. So I'm just going to give you a glimpse of Jonathan and his family.
At one point, he was in 5 different school districts in 6 years, which is tough for a kid. And so what became apparent to us over time was that Jonathan, as great a kid as he was suffering from some form of anxiety and depression.
Unfortunately, Jonathan was misdiagnosed with attention deficit disorder and prescribed Adderall, a powerful stimulant. Soon, to unwind at night, he began to drink. To calm his anxiety, he used Xanax, a mild tranquilizer, and smoked pot. Then, he experimented with heroin.
So we got him into counseling, and I did what a normal parent would do. I took away the Xbox, I took away his phone, I monitored all of his moves. In retrospect, it was probably the worst thing I could have done for him because it isolated him even more.
And ultimately, he tried to take his own life. He ended up wrapping his car around a telephone pole. It was at that point when we realized that we needed to get Jonathan into inpatient treatment, or we were going to lose him.
I went on the internet and searched, and it's overwhelming. There are so many different places out there. You don't know who's good, who's bad, who's just trying to make money. Financially, our insurance covered nothing. We really tried to find the best treatment possible out there. But in America, there's not a lot of support in the mental health, and especially in substance abuse.
So there were a lot of reasons why I thought this story was important. I mean, first of all, mental illness drastically increases the risk of addiction. And Jonathan really had anxiety and depression. It shows that, addiction doesn't just strike dysfunctional families. That was a highly functional family, the Winnefelds. But what was amazing to me is that here you have Mary Winnefeld on the internet searching for treatment. If her son had cancer, doctors would be by her side. His treatment would be mapped out. She wouldn't be navigating a broken system of care. It'd be covered by insurance. I mean, just the stigma in terms of how we treat addiction is incredible to me. But the other thing about the Winnefelds is treatment. You hear a lot of people say, this is a crisis, we need treatment. But this is the most important part of my film. I mean, what treatment? And is treatment effective? And if so, what treatment? They put their son in a 15-month inpatient rehab facility that was based on 12-step AA abstinence. It cost $300,000. He got better. He gets out. They think he's great. Like so many parents, they think he's cured. And they send him back to the University of Denver, and 3 days after they drop him off of school, he dies of a heroin fentanyl overdose. And, they're devastated, but it really helps me raise the point. What the evidence is saying, no one wants to hear it, is that abstinence-based treatment for opioid addiction has an 80 to 90% failure rate. That's what the data is saying. So I'm not against AA. I know many, many people have found recovery, using AA, but many people fail. And so the next thing that we try to do in the film is to try to look at, so what are the effective treatments right now for opioid addiction? And I found James Berry in West Virginia. He was a really interesting doctor because for years he had used AA in abstinence-based treatment to mainly treat people struggling with alcohol addiction. And I think he felt like he was getting some success rates. Then the opioid epidemic hit, and everyone struggling with opioid addiction, he'd get them detoxed, he'd send them to family therapy, group therapy, have them go to meetings, but most people would be relapsing and back out on the streets using again. And he was desperate, so he told me that he thought about opening a methadone clinic, which is highly regulated. You've all probably heard of methadone. It's a long-lasting opiate. It doesn't get you high. It normalizes brain functions. It bolsters dopamine levels. So when people use methadone correctly, they feel normal again. They can kind of go about their work. They're not in withdrawal. They don't feel cravings. But just as Barry was getting ready to open a methadone clinic, another drug came on the market called buprenorphine or Suboxone. And it's really kind of changed the treatment of opioid addiction. So Barry began treating his patients, and there's such a need for treatment in West Virginia, he treats them in groups. So I'm just going to show you a brief clip from his Suboxone Clinic, and then I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Suboxone.
You feeling better?
Barry began giving patients Suboxone.
Oh yeah, 100%. They started doing well. They started getting their lives back. They started getting to work again. Lawrence, how are you?
Good.
And how much time you got today?
I got like 260 or 250.
245 days.
245, okay, yeah.
Tell us what you've been doing for the last 2 weeks.
Work is picked up. I'm about to buy into my boss's business. Yeah, 35%. He's gonna let me buy in, so that'll be awesome for me.
So you really showed him what you've been able to do.
Yeah.
The main thing that makes Suboxone so effective is it's helping with these cravings that people are experiencing.
But it's so hard to break that chain.
Patient after patient after patient will tell me the same story. Listen, doc, I am not using to get high anymore. I am just using not to be sick anymore. What Suboxone does is it satisfies those cravings in a way that they're under control.
It works so much better on calming that demon inside you. If I went home and started doing opiates again, I was gonna kill myself.
I'm gonna have to go quicker. I should have thought about the time. So drugs like methadone and Suboxone, they cut the death rate by about half, and yet there's incredible stigma against them because everyone says you're just trading one drug for another. And I just would like to say that's not the definition of addiction. If you get on Suboxone and you're able to go back to work and you're doing well and you're engaging with your family, you're not compulsively consuming a drug despite negative consequences. So I'm going to go on to the next clip because I just want to show you, even though Suboxone is incredibly useful, we're not using it. About this clip is that it's a huge reenactment because I wasn't allowed into the hospitals.
Yet most people don't have access to effective treatment, especially medications for opioid addiction. For Dr. Corey Waller, the problem is that addiction is not handled like other diseases.
We got it back up to the 70s. If a patient comes into an emergency department with chest pain, we have a pretty standard set of approaches. We evaluate whether or not the heart's being injured. We look at an EKG that tells me, do they need to get something done quickly? And no matter what the answer is, we actually have a place for them to go.
For overdose victims, the focus is mainly on revival.
These are patients who are basically dead. They're not breathing. They are this close to being dead forever. Let's give the Narcan real quick.
The drug naloxone, sold under the brand name Narcan, can reverse an overdose by pulling opioids off receptors in the brain.
You all right? Good. And in most emergency departments around the country, that's the extent of the intervention. Check the box, sign the chart, discharge the patient. Unfortunately, we discharge them back out into the wilderness where there is no consolidated, appropriate care for them. Big deep breath.
Although Narcan saves lives, it can also put patients into acute withdrawal. Without medications to control cravings, many will overdose again.
Oh my God, hi.
The reason that I really wanted to do this sequence is across the country, everyone's using Narcan, which is great, and they're saving lives. But the big problem is that people will then leave the ER room and go into acute withdrawal, and of course they're going to use because they don't want to be sick, and they're going to use again, and they may relapse and die, and it's just making this revolving door. And one of the points we try to make in the film is we really need to be offering in the ER on demand a medication like Suboxone. It immediately stops withdrawal, it stops cravings, it stabilizes a person, they can begin to engage in treatment. So I'm going to show you now, so besides offering people effective, compassionate care, I'm going to show you now really my favorite sequence in the film on steps we could be taking right now. It's a harm reduction sequence to try to keep people safe and cut down the amount of overdose deaths. So I went to Vancouver, which has a fentanyl crisis. And there's an area in Vancouver called the Downtown East Side. It's similar to the Tenderloin in San Francisco. Like in August, the New York Times reported in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, they picked up 160,000 needles off the street. Well, that was happening in Vancouver, and they've come up with some innovative solutions to try to deal with it. So I'm going to show you that sequence right now.
Back in Vancouver, the opioid epidemic spurred the city to take bold steps, even before fentanyl tainted the drug supply. In 2003, it sanctioned the first legal site in North America where people could inject illegal drugs under medical supervision. Called Insight, the program provides clean needles to prevent the spread of infectious diseases, drugs to reverse overdoses, and help accessing services like medically assisted treatment.
When people come to Insight, often the first thing that they're thinking is, I need a safer place to use. I don't want to die in the alley. I'm tired of living in essentially what are third world conditions. So what we're doing is we're saying, come on into first world healthcare. And in the years since Insight's opened, overdoses in the area have gone down, and our HIV rate in Vancouver has plummeted dramatically.
Insight's success bolstered other efforts. At the Overdose Prevention Society, Sarah Blythe helps people test their drugs for fentanyl. But that's not the only contaminant she's worried about.
Because we've seen everything from cement filler to Comet to pig dewormer, like you name it, anything that they can put in there, they do, and it's dangerous.
A pink stripe indicates the presence of fentanyl. It's now found in 88% of illegal opioids here. Like many long-time users, Daniel knows he's injecting fentanyl. But the fear of dying isn't as powerful as his cravings. He first took opioids in prison to calm his anxiety.
There's always a fear of something horrible about to happen. There's gonna be somebody getting stabbed, a fight's gonna break out. And so when I did that first hit, it was the first time I felt like I could relax and not have to worry.
To my mind, obviously the most important thing about supervised injection sites is that it implicitly says that these lives are worth saving. These people are valuable to us. What's really important about it as well is that it's a space of connection. That's the space that people are going to ask for help from.
Supervised injection sites are illegal in the US, but in Canada, the controversy is waning.
So I know a lot of people say, I find that sequence really controversial. And, you know, really what I started to think is controversial is letting people die in unsafe conditions. I'd be out in the alleys in Vancouver, and sometimes it would take 10, 15 minutes for the EMS crews to come and revive an overdose, and I'm sitting here thinking, this is brain damage. But in these sites, the moment someone's in trouble, they instantly have Narcan or oxygen. They've brought down the overdose death rate in Vancouver 35%. As Darwin says, it actually saves taxpayers money. I mean, what are the most expensive facilities we have in this country? Emergency rooms and jail cells. In Vancouver, they're trying to get people to use these sites and access a whole bunch of services, from housing to mental health services to getting onto the Canadian healthcare system. Daniel is finally now tapering off fentanyl. He has a job in one of these sites as a peer recovery coach. He wrote me today and told me he finally has an apartment. So, I did see, Insight does connect people to treatment. And I think, when I talked to Darwin, he said, okay, we know what works. We know what stops the spread of disease, what saves taxpayers money, what saves lives. And what is reaction most places? Let's not do it. So on that note, sorry, I'm not used to being in front of the camera. So I didn't know how to time this talk, because when I got here today, instead of practicing, I got to come see what you were doing. So sorry it's so.
That was perfect. Let's give a hand for the first part of the show. First off, if any of you or anyone you know are having troubles with drugs, that door right there is your key to the beginning of solutions. So just wanted to point that out before we go any further. That's where Student Services is. When you're making your film, you just finished this last week, so you're like still tired, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. Who are you collaborating with when you're making the movie? Who are you deciding things with? Are you bouncing ideas off of anyone? Or are you solo on that part of the journey?
I usually edit my own films, but this time I worked with a young assistant editor who eventually took the editing credit. So I would show it to him. I would sometimes, like once a week, I'd send the film out to my staff. We'd have meetings. Of course, I go into Nova and get screenings, which are quite intense, and I get a lot of pushback and feedback. Mm-hmm. We have scientific advisors, so I am throwing the film out. But I do a lot of work in a vacuum in my own mind.
That's commendable and really hard, because I need feedback the whole time. That's what I need when I'm making films. We're going to be opening this up for Q&As as soon as the mic's out and people are in line, so it's up to you guys when you want to start asking questions. When you're working with a crew, what are the number of people that are out there with you, and what are each person doing?
So I always go out with a director of photography, an assistant camera. In our lab shooting, we usually have grips, and sometimes we might have dollies. When I was in West Virginia, I had 2 camera teams because I knew we were going to have to divide and conquer. People would be out trying to hang out with EMS crews to see what the overdoses they were responding to, and I was like tracking down stories. So we could be a crew of 10 or 4.
Mm-hmm. So 4 is the smallest.
Yeah.
And have you ever shot yourself? Have you ever been out there using the camera yourself or doing the miking yourself or anything like that?
You know what? There's so many times I wish I could just take the camera and get the shot I want, but no.
Why don't you do that?
Because I need to get the camera, I have to learn the technology. I just haven't had a chance to do it. I think that it's something I might try to do a little bit later in life, but I already edit, I write, I produce, I direct. Mm-hmm. It's nice. It's nice to have creative input from other people.
You mentioned NYU. Did you go to film school at NYU, or
did.
What was it like for you in film school? And did you go the whole 4 years at undergrad?
No, I transferred my senior year because I finally figured out what I wanted to do, and then I went for a year and a half and got a film degree. And it was what I've seen today. NYU. The equipment didn't work very well. You'd be checking out your Bolex. We'd get out on shoots, the Nagra wouldn't work. We had a lot of technical problems with the equipment. We were cutting on steam decks. I was so impressed today with the school and the education you're getting and the programs that are being run here, and the fact that you are actually doing shows that are, news shows and magazine shows. It's really going to help you when you get out in the world. It's a great experience.
So she just said Bolex. Who knows what a Bolex is in this crowd?
16 millimeter.
There you go. 16 millimeter camera that you actually wind.
Yeah.
And you get about 3 minutes before you have to wind it again, and you hope it's in sync with your audio, but it really never really is
I
in
mean,
sync.
you know, we were splicing film together. I mean, thank God we moved into the digital age.
Yeah. Do you remember the first time you used nonlinear editing, which of course is what everyone here uses their whole career in life?
I do. I was working on a Nova, and they said, we're moving over to Avid, and they didn't train me. And I'm like trying to figure out this system. So when I work with people, they're amazed at some of the things that I'm doing. And then they'll say, well, there's just a shortcut. And it's just because I never had time to take the classes. I just always, I mean, I get my films cut, but Yaro was laughing at me, and sometimes he would say, you know, there's a shortcut for that, and he'd show it to me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, there's just so much to learn.
When you, a lot of your films, or almost all your films, have been produced with the idea that they already had a distributor. They're already going on air. How hard is it for you to get films made? You're in the system of things getting done. Are you challenged every time? Are you banging on doors and begging people for the funding, or are you getting calls yourself?
Well, I mean, I wanted Nova to do the addiction film, and they were hesitant. And so I pitched it in 2016, and they didn't let me go out, start working on it until the fall of 2017. So usually, you know, like my executive producer has an idea of a film she wants to make, and she's trying to, you know, would you like to do this film? I think it'd be great. Let's meet and talk. Like, I know next week I'm going to be meeting with Nova about 2 films, and I already know that there's one that they're interested in, and I'm not really interested in it. So I'm not free to say.
No, I was going to ask you what it's about, but do you think you would take that because of it's a job and you need cash, or is it? Can you say, nope, I need to be in love with it before I do a film?
Well, increasingly, I'm able to say, I want to work on something I really care about. It's so much work. It's a lot of work. It's really important to work on films you care about. I mean, occasionally I've taken films because, you know, it's an immediate job. It's, you know, it's a worthy project, but I never have I don't work on it as hard as I work on a film like this.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
How hard you'll work on something you love.
Yeah, I thought this film mattered, and I felt like this film might be able to change people's attitudes. And to me, it's like these are preventable deaths. There's so many things we could be doing right now. And you keep hearing about these stories of all these people dying of overdoses, and you realize they didn't get good treatment. You know, abstinence-based treatment failed them. Why don't you try Suboxone? Why don't you try evidence-based counseling? I mean, I hope that we're going to be able to start stemming the death toll.
We have a question.
Hi, I'm Celia Prince. I want to be a documentarian. And I'm curious, how hard do you think it is for someone just starting out? Like, what kind of advice would you give to someone who wants to do this in this field?
I think it's hard. I think it's a tough career. I think it's an incredibly meaningful career, though, so I think it's really worth pursuing and sticking with. My advice to you is to look around and look at people you think are doing good work and try to work with them. Look at organizations you think are doing good work and try to be an intern there. While you're a student, try to intern with a place you respect or a filmmaker you respect, because you start to begin to make connections. And, you know, it's all about who you know. Don't waste your time. I mean, there are companies, you know, that I don't think are very nice to the people that work for them. I don't think they're doing very good work. Try not to waste your time there.
Can I add one thing?
Thank you.
Keep making films. As you're working for other people, just make nice short films. Give yourself the time and the ability to get those skills honed in. Make as many short films as you can here while you still have the safety net of being in school. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question. There we go. I knew that'd start the ball rolling.
Hi, Sarah. My name is Megan Boynton. I'm a journalism master's student here. And you're obviously a wealth of knowledge when it comes to this subject. So I just wanted to ask what your opinion is on the role of these big pharmaceutical companies when it comes to the opioid addiction in America right now.
You know, I mean, I think that they started the crisis, and they, you know, promoted drugs and claimed they weren't addictive when they knew they were. But I felt like there'd already been so much reporting on that and so many great articles. I had 52 minutes. And so instead of looking at how the crisis evolved or, you know, who to blame, that's why I said, why don't we start focusing on what's going to help people, how we can help people. But no, I think they played a huge role.
But she asked you what you think about it.
Oh, what I think about what they've done?
Yeah.
I think it's horrible. I wish we could, OxyContin is earning like $35 billion a year. I wish we could take some of that money back and pour it into these communities that have just been decimated.
Oh, I completely agree. Thank you.
Yeah.
If I may, prior to this film that I saw last night of yours, 60 Minutes and Reveal and the Washington Post have a series of that specific issue of the drug companies knowingly getting the doctors to prescribe this stuff. They're making enormous amounts of money. I think it's a crime against humanity. We were talking numbers earlier. 70,000 Americans died last year from opioid death. About 33,000 Americans die every year to car accidents. And about 35,000, correct me if I get this wrong, 35,000 Americans die from gunshot wounds. So if you add car wrecks and gunshot wounds, you're going to get to where the opioid epidemic is now. And the opioid epidemic just doubled. So is it going to double again?
Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any end in sight. And what's really driving the opioid epidemic, and I don't think it's hit the Southwest yet, is fentanyl. I don't think black tar heroin has been laced with fentanyl yet. But in the East, that's what was so tragic about someone like Jonathan. It just takes the equivalent of 2 grains of salt of fentanyl will kill you. And it's coming in, and so a sugar packet of fentanyl smuggled in from China, very hard to detect. And I tell young people, if you do illegal drugs on the streets in cities where there's fentanyl, it's Russian roulette.
All right.
Hey, Peter. Hi, Sarah. You had mentioned that one of the scenes was a reenactment because you weren't allowed to go into the hospital. Can you explain, as a documentary filmmaker making a story about medicine, at what point do you fight for the right to go into a place that's sensitive versus just doing a reenactment?
So I wanted to shoot this scene at Mass General because it was one of the few ERs in the country that will give Suboxone and medication on demand after an overdose. And they had just paid like $1 million fine because they'd had a series there called Trauma. And even though they had releases from the patients, someone had died and a family member had seen this on television and they sued Mass General. And so at that point, I couldn't set foot on any hospital in Boston with a camera. I could shoot an exterior of a building and an ambulance coming in, but I couldn't go inside. And I really I wanted people to understand how crazy it is that, a 60-year-old comes in with a heart attack, and there's a whole medical protocol. Do you need surgery immediately? Do you need cardiac rehab? Can you go home and see your doctor the next day? Let's give you medication to lower your blood pressure, cholesterol. And yet, a young person comes in from an overdose, they have a high likelihood of dying within the next 10 months, and they're just released with absolutely no place for them to go. And it was just a great way to show you that how addiction is not part of the medical system. We need to bring addiction into the medical system and treat it like any other medical condition. So Corey Waller reenacted the overdose. I shot it blurry, but I didn't know how else to drive it home. And it was really, we talked a lot about this at WGBH, like the station didn't know how comfortable they were with me doing that. But I felt like it was effective and drove the point home.
There's also the footage of the babies. Those were obviously?
No, those were cell phone videos of people overdosing.
No, the babies that were born addicted.
Oh, so you saw the film?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. No, that was real footage.
Okay.
That was real footage.
You were allowed to film the babies.
Okay, so sometimes people break the rules. And that pediatrician in the hospital was so concerned about the plight of the babies that were born, every 25 minutes a baby is born dependent on opioids, and he had shot this footage with his cell phone. And he wrote to the mothers. He even wrote to CPS, Child Protective Services, and got me permission to use some of the footage. So that was all real footage.
It's really powerful footage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for those questions. The idea of reenactment, just so you all know, I'll be real quick on this. It was a film called Thin Blue Line, Errol Morris. He did reenactments in that film, and that sort of changed the way the documentary film world looked at reenactments. Before that, it was really not respected. He made an amazing film that literally changed the way we deal with death row. He saved someone from death row, actually. And then a film called Man on Wire won the Academy Award, I don't know, 10 years ago. Fantastic film, amazing reenactments. So the idea of reenactment to tell a documentary story, it's now much more accepted than it was when you were in film school, and certainly when I was in film school as well. They just took the mic away, even though we started a little bit late. They're going to make us stop near 8? Is that what the deal is? You're going to take some time from us. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up here. I want to thank you, Sarah, for making the time to come here. And I would say that we'd like to have you back and maybe let you have more time with students so you can really dig into how you make your films. I think that would be fantastic. And I think the school would be very open to that. In your time and your busy schedule, if you'd like to come back, I am absolutely sure we'd like to have you back.
Well, thank you.
And I'd like to have you visit my class. You got to come on a Friday. All right, so everybody, thanks Sarah Holt.
Thanks for coming out tonight.